All right, can everyone hear me? Excellent. So we're going to continue on the what we were working on last time, I think, the data file reading demo. I've got where I'm at with it here. If you have your project from last time, you can continue using that. I'm just kind of doing this one on the fly, so it's not a formal demo or anything. But if you need to catch up with where we're at, you can grab this one and it'll have what we did so far. So I'll just review quickly what we had. And so we had this CSV file that we created. And it just had some numbers and some text and some other numbers. Notice there's some spaces in this text here. And then we had, I called it struct review. It really is database. I mean, it is really just reading data. And if everyone could mute their mic. And so let's see what we had so far. We had get data from file. We opened up our file. We made an IF stream because we're reading. And then what does this thing here do that I'm pointing at and highlighted? Yeah, it returns false if we can't open the file successfully. So that's called a guard, and it's a common thing that we use in a lot of programs. Let me let my Visual Studio catch up. Maybe I'm running too many apps at once. So let me just give it a second to let my computer catch up. Cool. Okay, so this is called a guard. And this is, and then here we create a variable and we use getLine to read from the file. Notice that we're using a while. Why do we put this in a while? Yeah, so it reads every line. That's actually what's going to make it so that you actually stop reading when you get to the end of the file. So this will keep getting a line from the file until you get to the last one. When you get to the last one, there won't be any line. This will become an empty string, what does an empty string evaluate to from a Boolean perspective? It'll be a false. So then it'll break out of this and continue on. So this is how. So this structure here is read each line basically. And then let's see, we have, so that's what we created. And then when we ran this, we just called get data from file. And right now we're just outputting the file. That's not actually ultimately what we want to do, but it allows us to test to see if this actually works. So that we can actually read the file. So we successfully read the file. We read one line at a time, but the problem is that right now we're reading this every single. We're reading them as individual, as a one continuous line. That's not very useful to us. What we really want to do is be able to read this as individual variables. So let's see if we can figure out how to do that. So rather than reading this a line at a time, maybe what we'll do is we'll do this. And if we look at our file, we see the first one is an integer. So maybe we'll create int I'm just going to call it value1 for now. Goes into value1. So right now I'm just going to read one value from the file. And we get the 1. So this works. And then if I look at my file, I'm going to try to get this one. Well, that's a double, so now I'll read the second value and see what that does. Okay, I got a 0. And I think it's this comma which is giving me a problem. So I'm going to read this in a little differently. Because this thing is separated by a comma, I'm going to read it in as a string. I'm going to read it in this way. So if we read that let's see if, actually, before I do that, let me see if I can put another value in here and see if that actually is the problem. Nope, that's not it. Why is it reading 0? So I think part of the problem is because of the spacing and the commas. We can't read this. If it's a comma separated value file, we can't really read this very easily using just a normal CIS. If we had spaces in here, so if I had this, for example, this would probably work. I have a file lock on the .exe there. I've got to restart this project. Yes, Marinissa, you're thinking in the right direction. The problem is that that our regular, CN type of reading files is giving us a problem. We don't really change it in IF stream. What we do is we're just going to use a get line, and then we're going to convert a get line to a numeric value using some of the string stuff we learned before. But just to continue on with this demo, let me see if I can get this to work. Sometimes this happens. You get a your executable gets stuck. Let me see if I can find yeah, this is a different command prompt though. Doesn't look like I have any tasks open. Oh, I bet you it's my Dropbox that's trying to sync that up. I had counted this. If you have a Dropbox, sometimes when it tries to sync up a file, it will actually lock it. So that can be a problem. I'm going to pause syncing here, and then that should probably fix it. Okay, let me see if I can get this to build now. Still same problem. Well, there's multiple ways of dealing with this type of stuff. Interesting stuff. Okay, so you can see that would work. So if we didn't have the commas in our data file, then it would work. But we have commas, so we can't read this struct, or we can't read this this data file using the things that we're used to up till now. So we need to come up with a different way to read this value in. So rather than doing this and trying to feed in, I'm going to go back to this while, but there's a format where we can specify a delimiter, and I'm going to of a get line that specifies a delimiter. And so in my get line, I'm going to put this delimiter that says read, rather than reading up to the carriage return with my get line, I'm now going to read up to a comma. So does everyone see this third parameter here? Yeah, it looks like stuff here. It's trying to treat your file like it's a program file. I'm not sure why that would be. Make sure it's not in the source files folder, that it's actually at the project level. This is actually, you'll notice that this file is not in source files. So that might keep it from them trying to encode, to treat it like code. So now we've got a different delimiter. I'm going to run this right now as is and see what happens. Let's see. Get rid of that. So we're like this now. Yeah, that might be an Xcode thing. You may need to tell Xcode that that's just a data file, that it's not actually a program file. And so now we can see I am getting lines. It got the first number, and then the rest of this stuff is coming in, and it's kind of bringing everything in a cascading way, because what it did is read this first one correctly. Now here it's reading till the next comma, and it kind of looks kind of messy, but we're going to fix that up. What we can see is that this actually works, and it's bringing in one element at a time. So when you have a comma separated value file, you have to use, or you kind of need to use getLine in this way. And then what we're going to use is we're going to declare some variables for this. Let's say we call this num1, num2, text, and num3. So I'm going to declare some variables. I'm going to declare int for num1, double for num2, string for the text piece, and then the last number, let's see what it is. It's an int, so we can use int for num3. And so now, if I get a line, okay, I must have a line, so now I'm going to say get line, and I'm going to read from the file, and I'm going to, and this is actually going to go, actually, the way this works is I'm going to be reading in, I'm going to change this from line to element, because it's really just one element that I'm reading in now. And I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say num1 is equal to and how do I, so element's a string. How can I convert a string to an int? Can anyone remind me how to convert a string to an int? Very good, both of you. STOI are essentially your casting. Well, it's not really a cast. This is a parse. String STOI is not really casting. What you're doing is you're parsing the string. So we can do an STOI and pass in element. And then I will do another get line, file element, and then read to, and then if I look at my data file, the next one is terminated by a comma. So I'm going to read that with a comma. And then we'll say num2 is equal to STOI element. And then I'm going to get line from file. And I'm just reading back into element again each time because I don't really need to preserve that string, but I need to use that string. And if I look at my data file, now I'm really just reading in this whole text thing here. And that's separated by a comma. And yeah, I could read directly into this, but just to kind of keep this consistent, I'm going to say text equals element. And why aren't I, and actually, should this be STOI or something else? Should this be STOI? STOD would read into a double. Remember, STOF will make it a float. STOD will make it a double. And then this one, because it's coming in as a string, I'm just going to bring a string. And then I've got this last one. How do I read that last one? Do I read it get line, file, element, with a comma again. Will that work? Good. You don't need the comma. Why don't we need the comma? That's correct. This is the end of line. If we were actually to look at this in Notepad++, we could see the carriage return at the end. So what we need to do is we actually need to omit this on this last one so that it reads the last element, and then we can say num3 is equal to, what am I going to use? SCOI of element. And now I can maybe display my line. Does that make sense? I'll pause for a little bit so people can get caught up if they're typing with me. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and let's see what happens. Hey, I read everything. It looks pretty nice. I mean, you could do some outputs. But what I really wanted to do is I want this function to read stuff, and I wanted to return something. You know, this is all well and good to read a data file, but I mean, that's kind of what we had. What we really want to be able to do is get this data out of this function and send it back to main. And right now, I'm kind of overriding each of these variables. So what would be a good way to store what I'm getting out of this file and put it in something that I could put back? What could I use to do that? So I want to be able to send this back out of the function. I could use a vector or I could use an array. So actually, a vector probably makes more sense in this case. We're going to do this with arrays because we kind of want you to become comfortable with arrays. And it would make more sense to do that. Let me see. Back to my regular pointer. Okay, so we want to make them arrays. So these things could be arrays. What if rather than calling them num1, I'm going to say this is an array called column1, and just I know that there's going to be about 5 things. I'm going to say we're going to have 10 elements, and then I'm going to make an int column1 count is equal to 0, and then we're going to do the same thing here. Double column2 of 10, and an int. And actually, I don't really need different column counts because they're all going to be the same. I'm going to just make a variable here, int called count, because they're all going to have, we're going to accept that they're all going to be the same. And I'm going to make another array called column3. And obviously, if you're making this for a program that was more established, these would have more meaningful names. But we're just going to use this for now. So we got 4 columns, and so we're going to say column1, column2, column3, column4, and then what we'll do is we'll now use those variables. So I'll say column1, and what should I put as my index for this? And how should I handle the indices? Good, Joey. So we could use this count. And all these will be kind of the same thing. So we'll increment count at the end so that each time we loop through here, we'll increase the count. And of course, I changed my variable name, so these all have to change. So now these get, we create an array. Good point. So I'm going to give this a try, see if we're reading the values okay. Okay, so that kind of proves that we are, in fact, reading our file okay. It is putting things into this array, but really to test this, now what we need to do is we need to send these arrays back. So how, given these arrays, how do I pass these arrays in to this function? So now that gets back to how do we pass arrays to a function? So how should I really write that? Yeah, these really need to be declared in main. So I'm going to cut them from here and I'm going to place them in main up here. But now we need to pass these into this function, right? So how do I need to change this function to bring them in through the parameters? So here's main, and what I want to do is I want to pass these arrays into this function. What do I need to do? Yeah, we'll update our prototype after we get the function set up correctly. So good point. How do we need to change the function header line or the prototype? So we want to take these arrays and pass them in through the parameters to this function. You need to look at your book. Can you all hear me? Aloy, yes. That looks correct. In fact, I'm going to just copy what you have here. And I'm going to paste it. Excellent. You figured it out. We don't put the numbers in here. We basically declare our variables. Pretty close. We need to make a couple changes. I need this to be column 1, and then I need this one to be double column 2, column 3, column 4. Yeah, but essentially you got it right. So, so now I'm going to, of course, copy this to my function prototype. Let me open that up. So we'll put that over here. This back over here. And just to make it clear what's going on. So I copied my function prototype, and then in driver, I need to now pass in column 1, column 2, column 3, and column 4. So that was a change we made to the top of the program. Passing in those columns. There's probably one other thing we should probably return, though, isn't there? What else should we pass back with this function? And here's the thing. I could change a number of... I'm passing in 10 element arrays here, but am I actually going to get 10 elements out of this function automatically each time? So right now this is set up so I'm passing in a 10 element array into here. And actually, let me just go on to the next step. It'll make more sense. So I actually don't want to see out in here. I'm going to take the see out of this function because I want to use this to test to see if I actually get my arrays back. I'm going to instead put my see out over in main. And so I need to make a for loop for int I equals 0. I is less than something. So what I'm doing here is, and this will now be I in here. So I'm using the I as my loop variable. So I'm going to loop through everything once I get out and display what's there, just to make sure that I'm actually getting these arrays back from this get file. But the question I have is right here. What do I put in here? You got it. We got to pass count. So we need, count here. And so I'm going to put count. And then in functions.cpp, I'm going to put int count. So will that work? And then, of course, in this case, I'm not going to re-declare it because I'm bringing it in from here. Does that look like it will work? And here's a question. Is this an in variable or an out variable? Are we bringing things in through that parameter, or are we trying to push things out through that parameter? It's going out. So how should I really write that parameter? Very good. Could be a pointer or a reference. How many people want a pointer? How many people want a reference? It can be either one, but I'm going to do it as a pointer because pointers are usually harder for us to understand. So I really want this to be a pointer to an int. So that's now a pointer to an int. How do I reference count then if I make it a pointer? What do I need to do with this line right here? Is that changing the actual value of count, or is that changing the address of count and making it point to the very beginning of the stack or RAM? Not in the function. We're going to pass it in with that when we make the function call, but if it's a pointer, what do we need to use there? An asterisk. So when you're using pointers, just think of it this way. When I'm in the function, if I'm using pointers, it's an asterisk everywhere. Asterisks are for functions, for function definitions. If I left this count like this, what would happen? It would actually go to the next byte in memory. That's why we have to have this dereferencing thing here. So you can actually progress through memory with a plus plus that way. So now we have this as a pointer now. We declared this as a pointer to an int, and we've dereferenced it here wherever we're using it with an asterisk inside of our function. Hopefully that's a good review for everyone on pointers. And then make sure that our function prototype lines up. And then what we're going to do is over here in our driver, what do we put there? Address of. So this is where we're using the address of. We're passing the address of count, and here it's going to get a pointer to an int. What would be a better way of naming this? So there's actually this renaming function. I'm going to, if you right-click on a variable and click on rename, and you notice there's a shortcut key, Control-R, Control-R, I'm going to rename this actually to pcount so that I know it's obvious that that's a pointer. And once you do that, you click Apply, and it'll actually change it everywhere where it's being used. And it didn't do it there, so I'm just going to copy this back over. It doesn't really matter, but I like to keep it consistent, so I'm going to copy that all over. So again, that's right-click, rename. If you want to rename a variable, that's a really good way to do it. So I've renamed it to pcount. Why would I call it pcount rather than just count? Just it's common for a pointer. You can also use PTR if you prefer that. So again, I'll demonstrate the rename PTR count. So that's how you do a rename. It's not renaming it in the function prototype because it actually here it doesn't really care about the variable names in here, but so much that they match up. So you could do PTR count, P underscore count, however you want to do it. Notice that that doesn't change it here. Here I'm pointing an address though to an int, so that's all that's required here. So now that I've got that pointer, what do I put in here? Count. Notice I don't put an and here. I only put the and percent in here when I'm passing in an address. Here I want the actual value of count, so I put count. And then I'm going to run that and see if that actually worked. Oh, I have a syntax error. This should be a semicolon. Seem to have a problem. So I'm bringing in PTR count. So what happened here is, what do you suppose happened down here where we have this warning? Are we incrementing the value of PTR count, or are we incrementing the pointer itself? And it says possible incorrect order of operations, dereference ignored. How could we fix that? It says it's an order of operations problem. Would parentheses fix that? Looks like it does. So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, force the dereference operator to happen first, then do the increment. You can see how references would make this easier at this point. So vectors and references would make this a lot easier, and now we can see that this is in fact working. And what this tells you is we called our get data from file function. We passed in references to our arrays and to our count variable. When it came out, we had a count variable and we had the arrays, and we're able to loop through them afterwards. So we are in fact getting our elements. Pretty cool. Does that make sense? So I'm going to go look at one of the specs that's up there, and we're going to keep playing around with this probably from here till the end of the semester a bit, and actually we'll play around with this a little bit more today. This is how you read the data in. The next things we will need to do is use those columns of information to calculate some statistical data, and then output information. So let's take a look at make sure, and you notice how I'm always kind of rigorous about let me see, where is my functions. I always copy and paste and never type into the .h. I always copy and paste that back over. By now, has everyone figured out that this is just the top line of your functions? So if I If I display these side by side, you should be able to figure out. By the way, there is a zoom function on I think in your window. So if it's too small, you can zoom in. So let's pause for about 10 minutes. At 12:45, we'll reconvene. This will give you a chance to kind of get this to work. Now you should be getting stuff out. You may want to um, add some additional print statements and see what you're getting from the file. Um, well, one logical place, like in this function, so one logical place, like to test it, you notice how, like, when I started building up my program, as I went through, I would, see what was printed out as I went along. So Right here you could put a print statement that says print, file not found or something, and then in here you could put in a cout statement. I'm sorry, a cout statement that says that just outputs what you're reading with elements, so that you could see those things coming through. The other thing you can do is run in debug mode and make sure that as you go through, and that's probably the best answer, is put a stop point in your data file reading part and see if you're actually successfully opening up the file. Now, what might be happening is, your files, you want to make sure that if you look at the properties for a file, that it doesn't have exclude from build, enabled or anything like that. That there isn't something goofy like that going on. And let's see, other properties. Yeah, so there are things along those lines that you can do. It should be copying over though, or it should be referencing it okay. And so running in debug mode is probably your best bet. Yeah, array names are always pointers. So you can so in this case, it looks like we're just sending in a variable, but we're actually passing this in as a reference. So and that's why we say that some types are considered value types and some are considered reference types. Arrays are reference types. They get passed in always to a function as a pointer. Count, an int, is actually a value type. In order to pass it in as a reference, we have to declare it as a pointer or as a reference. And if it's a pointer, we have to put in the ampersand sign in front of it. Does that make sense? I think it normally just is included, but it's useful to right-click on it and check properties If it doesn't say exclude from build, if it doesn't, then you should be. It should be. Mine says doesn't participate in the build. That basically just ensures that it's not trying to parse it as a program, so that's okay. So it should be. It should be set like that. It should be copying over. It should be okay. The other thing to check is right-click on your project and open the folder in File Explorer, and make sure that it is actually in your project folder. If it's not in your project folder, it may be appearing here, but it may be pointing to somewhere else on your computer. In that case, delete it from here or remove it from there, and then bring it into your project folder, and then from your project folder drag it back over. Yeah, if that's the case, it should be finding it. So I may need to, after this, I may need you to send me your program, and I'll see if I can figure out what's going on with it. Okay, so let's take a look at the next spec. So swap colors, swap phrases. Someone asked me about test cases for this. Basically, just test it out by checking against sentences and phrases and see if you get the. You should do the swap outs by hand and then see if it gets the expected results. Program 7 is going to be basically kind of doing what we just did here, but what you're going to do is you're going to locate a data file on the web, and there's a lot of different places you can get data sets. You can go to NOAA.gov, you can go USGS.gov. There's also if you go to Albuquerque Open Data. There's a whole bunch of data sets in here. Now these data sets, I would make sure I get ones that said CSV. There's a lot of different, like here it says this is a JSON file. That's going to be hard for you to parse through. Let's see, travel expenses. This has a CSV file. If I click on that, it'll download a CSV file, and then if I open it, I will see that this data is actually a comma separated value file. Now, when you download files, one thing I recommend is don't just open them up in Excel. Find where your file was downloaded. And let's see if I can find it. And view it in Notepad++. And the reason you want to do this is because Notepad++ has a show all characters capability, and that kind of shows you what's going on. If I look at this, I'll notice that it looks like this one's actually stored as tabs, and I also want to look at the encoding. If it says UCS2, I'm going to want to convert to UTF-8 and then save it. And the reason for that is that in C++, we're going to read UTF-8 better than UCS2. and then this is so before in our program we used a comma as our separator right here. When we read this, in this program, what will we use as our separator? And I'll zoom in here. It's kind of hard to see. You can see there's like an orange arrow between each element. What is that? It's a tab. What's the how do you identify a tab in when you write it out as a character? So in this section, if it's a tab, what would I put right here? So when my get line, what do I put there? So if a carriage return is \n, what do you suppose a tab is? Yep. \t will be what you would put if you're tab delimited. So if you're tab delimited, you would use \t. If it's comma delimited, you would use a comma. And if it's any other delimiter, you would use whatever the delimiter is. And what the delimiter is whatever's between here. So for example, if I change this to tabs, I just hit tab in there, then this would have to be \t. If it's actually a comma, then there would be a comma in here. Does that make sense? And then you can see where the line feeds are. Another thing that might be important is at the end of the file, sometimes this can mess things up. Notice here that we have a line feed and then an empty string. That can change the behavior of things. So you may need to, and where that would affect things is in your code, how this might terminate. So I think you're okay, but but sometimes that can make some weird things happen. Okay, so that's an example of where you can find files. So you're going to find a file, and then what I'm going to ask you to do is write a Word document, and or any other kind of document, as long as I can read it. You know, if it's anything other than Word, please give it to me as PDF. So you're going to write a description of the data, what it represents, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to ask 3 data questions. So these can be: what is the average? What is the greatest? What is the min? You know, what is the mode? If you want to do statistic stuff, you can, but largest, smallest, average or total are fine questions to ask. But you're going to pick at least 3 data questions, and you're going to provide for me in Program 7 Part 1 your data file and what data questions you're going to answer with your code. And you're going to do what we just did in this little demo here. You're going to get your data, put it in your project, open it up, and read it into some arrays. And you know, I want a file which has at least 25 lines of data. You know, and the other thing is that you shouldn't rewrite the data file. You should use the data file as is. And Because the idea is that, let's say that they post an update to that data file, you want to be able to just apply the updated the program to the same updated file without having to change a file every time. Someone's okay. So they have here's some example code of one. We read it one way. This is another way that you can also read your file. Some files, for example, this one, and most data files you have will have a header row. This has a header row, which you might want to skip over. And in the instructions here, they show you, a way to skip using getLine skip. So that allows you to skip over maybe a just read a whole line into a throwaway variable is one way of skipping over elements of data or rows of data that you don't want. And then, so for part one, you're going to locate the website. And then you don't need to meet with me and get approval before you move forward. Just put it up on Blackboard. And you don't need to print anything out for me. Just put your just put a link to your data set, or put your data file. Actually, you're going to be making a program to just read the data file for this first part. So your data file will be in there. Just answer these questions. What is the website where you got the data? If you have more data, how are you going to just get the elements you want? And then tell me what 3 questions you're going to answer. You're going to answer with your code in part 2. So part 2, if you look at it, will basically be to take the first part that you created and then add in some data analysis questions. Does that make sense? Can everyone hear me? Well, yeah, and I'll post what I did with the code this time. Here are some things where this code may be a little different for part 1, where you're just reading the file. One, you may, before you get into this while, you might be doing a getLine just to skip elements. The other thing that might be different is you may be using a tab rather than a comma. The other things that might be different is you may not want all these columns from the data. You may actually skip over columns, in which case, you can, skip elements. You can just add additional, like if I didn't want column 1, I could just do that. And here I'm skipping over 3 columns and only reading 2 columns worth of data. So you can skip over the things you don't want just by doing get lines into some dummy variables and to skip over things. Does that make sense? The other thing you're going to do is, the types of these arrays are going to be different. Now, so if that makes sense, then let me take a capture of this this version of the data demo. Yeah, this is recorded. Now there's one other change I want to do with this. I want you to use structs for your data if there's more than one column. And I'm going to demonstrate that here in a second. Okay, so let me ask you this. This is using parallel arrays, but could I use a struct to hold this information? So watch this. I could do this. I could create a struct called, I'm going to call it data, and int num1 a double num2 string text, and use more meaningful names, but I'm just using this as int num3. So I could declare this struct, and then maybe what I could do is, rather than doing this, how about if I just made one array? Still doesn't like that. Why isn't it like that? Functions.h. What am I missing? Let me look something up. Okay, I'll take that. Okay, no, it likes that, but oh, I have to do that. Okay, so I forgot the number. So I could make this, I could do this instead, and then what would happen is in here, I would then use the struct, and it would be data and to make this work I have to include functions.h in my functions.cpp so that it can get a reference to data. And now what it would be data dot num1 num2 dot text num3. So now I'm using .num1. Now I've got one array of my structs, and then I'm using the dot operator with my struct to get each individual element out of it. And then I can just take this prototype, replace my functions.h, and then I just need to pass in data. And so I will display this in a second. But now this will be data subset I dot whatever value. The only difference really here is we're using a struct. To hold all the information, and then we only need one array. Does that make sense? This is actually, and what you'll notice is the parallels is the struct is holding the elements of the data. It is very similar to the data file. These are the elements we want from the data file. We create a struct in main. We pass it to our function. Our function takes, and we're combining two things here, a struct with an array. So this is an array of that struct. We pass that to the function, and as it's reading, all it does is, it keeps incrementing the count as it reads a line, and then it takes each of the elements and puts them into each of the elements of the struct. So I'll put both these versions up, the array version, the parallel array version and the struct. You're going to find that using a struct will be cleaner, and understanding how this works will help set you up for understanding classes later on too. So that's all I've got for today. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll post that in within the next hour or so. P6, does it specify whether you use a struct or an array? I don't have it open. I don't want to obscure my screen right now. I think you should. I think you're being asked to use an array. Yeah, and a lot of times the way we're setting up these requirements is we want you to get experience using kind of everything, and so you know, and ideally come out of here and you understand arrays, you understand structs, you can combine them together. You also understand vectors, you understand character arrays and strings, and that kind of gives you all the pieces you need. Yeah, include everything in your project that makes it run, so I don't have to drag files over. That should be in your project anyway, so it's easier just to zip the thing up as it is. Yeah, no, and that's why I think the recordings are good. Yeah, and yeah, I don't, as long as they have 25 elements and, um, and you have some columns to read through, that's all we're looking for here. I don't recommend trying to read I'd recommend, choose your file wisely, make it pretty similar to what we've been doing here. If you find like a JSON file or an XML file that you're trying to read through, it's just going to be really difficult. So you're going to learn how to, we're going to teach you how to use more complex parsers later on in other programming languages. So this one, just find a nice comma separated value or tab separated value file, and don't make it too difficult on yourself. Yeah, if you got Joe, if you got a file, it doesn't matter what, we're not looking for the currency of data. I'm not evaluating your this from a data analysis perspective, just from a programming perspective. And I will be posting these in announcements. The recordings in YouTube. It takes me about an hour to post-process these so that I can post them on YouTube. So it's going to probably be by the end of the day, around the end of the day, maybe late at night when I got these up and running. They are text files. Let me make sure. Yeah, what I recommend is throw some cout statements in there and run in debugging mode. Most of those previous videos are still going to be on Collaborate Ultra to find the previous recordings. Yeah, for program 6, you should see sentences, swap phrases, colors.txt. So those are the text files that you'll put those in your project so you can get to them. Yeah, and if anyone needs office hours, do me a favor, email me, and we'll meet up on WebEx like this, and we'll do it that way. But email me ahead of time that you want to meet me during my office hours. It just makes it a little easier, so I can make sure everything's up and running. Yeah, it's really nice of Jess to set up his office hours like that too. No, I don't have a turn in place for that. And at this stage, I, I think we got pretty much everything turned in that we need to. So, if I'm not going to make you turn this one in, I kind of did this one out off the top of my head. I can't remember. No, I don't think we did. We went through the code, but I don't think we actually did that one. Maybe we'll do that one next time just to kind of review it. But first I want to make sure, actually we're going to keep playing around with this, and this has a lot of passing files, so I'll probably take that one off. Yeah, once we get this one done, then the follow-on to this is actually going through and passing an array to a function, and then looping through that function that array. And I think we kind of did a little bit of this stuff in one of the demos before, where you loop through the array and you get the total. If you think about it, if you get the total, you can figure out the average. And your demonstration, and you have code in the book that actually goes through, doing a max, min, and I think a total and an average, which is typically what you have. So if you can imagine putting those functions together along with this get from data file, and then you have a write to file, which you've already written before, you kind of have everything you need for all the rest of the programs. So we'll just keep refining that knowledge in the next few days. So I need to get to my next class. So are there any last questions I haven't answered before I sign off? See you Wednesday. And I'll hang out at the end of next class. It goes from, let's see, 1:30 to 3:30. So around, if you need some help around 3:30, just log back into this this line, and then I'll continue on and help you all out.